Great. So, welcome everyone. We're so glad that you're able to join us tonight. I know that a lot of people had off today, so hopefully you're cozy in your PJs and didn't hurt your back shoveling snow. It was light and fluffy, right? So that was a nice change. But I'm Tracy Sockalosky. I am the president of MassCUE and also the director of humanities for the Newton Public Schools. And I'm joined by Karen Janowski. Go ahead, Karen. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Great to see you all tonight. Yeah, Karen Janowski. I am an inclusive and assistive technology consultant with EdTech Solutions. I'm the president and owner of that company. We're in about 50 different school districts in the greater Boston area, and I'm a new member of MassCUE, of the MassCUE board. Excited to be part of what's happening at the state level. So we are just excited that you all joined us tonight on a webinar talking about designing for learner variability. It's a passion of ours, and we love sharing with others and learning from others. In fact, when Tracy and I were working together, we actually taught each other a few new things because we're always learning something new, right, Tracy?
Always. And it goes back years. I was saying to Karen that I think the first time I met her, she doesn't even know that she met me. It was back in, I don't know, 2003 or four, and we were, sitting in some conference room in Reading and on a PD around UDL. So it's been a long time. So let's get
Wow,
started.
we'll have to talk about that. I didn't even know that.
I know. See, there you go.
So, what is learner variability? Because that really is the term that we're focusing in on tonight. How do we design for learner variability? Well, we know that our students have a variety of their cognitive abilities. There's a great range in terms of cognitive abilities. There's a great range in terms of background knowledge and the experiences that they bring into their school day and into the classroom. Their learning preferences are individualized as well, what works well for them. And the accessibility and support needs are incredibly variable. And there's a lot of ways that we can accommodate for those differences and those distinctions, and especially regulation and engagement as well. How do we hook our learners in a new way? How do we help them regulate? There's so many different ways that learner variability manifests itself in our classroom. And so we want to be cognizant of that and how we can design, recognizing that there's a range of abilities and a range of presentations in our classrooms.
When we
So,
talk about
sorry, go
meaning,
ahead.
yeah, I'll drop this one. When we talk about participation, we don't want just people to just be in the classroom. We want them to be participating meaningfully. And we constantly have to think about it's not just who did you design for? If you design for only one thing, who's left out? And this is something that I know in my practice, I was a 22-year classroom teacher. It was people like Karen who had me thinking more and more about, did everyone in that room have full access to engage fully in the learning? And who, based on the decisions I was making as an instructional leader, was who was I excluding very unintentionally? Because I never wanted to exclude anybody, as I know most teachers don't. But it wasn't until I started thinking very, very intently about including everyone that I started making shifts in my instructional practice that I think really did start opening up possibilities for students that I hadn't previously.
So Tracy, that you started reflecting on your practices, right? And then that gave you the opportunity to really think about who was being left out. And like you say, it's unintentional, but when we design intentionally and proactively, we really want to reflect and ensure that if we take the next slide, for example, and we're designing, we have to acknowledge learner variabilities. So we tend to teach to the middle, but when we are teaching to the edges, whether they're those highly gifted learners or the learners who have, for a variety of reasons, are on the lower end, then when we design to the edges, we are ensuring that all learners benefit and all learners can learn. So through acknowledging learner variabilities, we really want to focus in on how we can reach all.
Absolutely. I mean, I tell all the time that I became a far better educator when I became a parent of school-aged
Yeah.
children.
Yeah.
And I have three kids that could not be more different if I had drawn them myself. And they each have very distinct learning needs and differences. And I would have to think thoughtfully if they were all in the same class because their needs are so radically different. And I think that's the perspective I have. If that's just three kids, what about other people's families? What about other children that come into your classrooms? So I think it's just always important to remember that the edges aren't always learning differences that are learning disabilities. Sometimes there are engagement differences. Sometimes there are medical differences. Like, there could be all kinds of things that impact whether a student is available to learn that day. And then also, what enables them to learn at their best? What allows them to thrive at their best? And what can we do to produce those opportunities for them?
So one of the things that we think about, and when I work with different educators, I'll often ask, with your learners, how are they independently accessing grade level content? So as an assistive technology and inclusive technology consultant, I'm called in to work with students who are on IEPs. And this is a common question that I ask. And unfortunately, a very common response is, well, we read to them, and even in middle school and high school. And so we want to think about who benefits when the learner is dependent on an adult reading content to them because they can't access grade level content independently. And another question I ask is, how does the learner demonstrate their learning? And again, too often I hear, well, we scribe for them. And again, when we use that particular instructional method, who is benefiting? Is it, it's certainly not allowing the learner to become more successful and independent. And I have to tell you, just recently, I was in a high school working with a team, and they had this was a sub-separate classroom, and they were working on vocabulary skills. And so they had students, they printed out the vocabulary words and the definitions. This is high school, and they asked the students to cut out the words and cut out the definitions and glue them on note cards. Well, these were students who could not independently read grade level content. And so I asked them, how did they come up with that particular instructional method to use? And I think it was because that was what was familiar to them. And you don't know what you don't know. So we talked about some alternative ways that could help promote independence and help those learners to become more successful. So we really want to reflect and understand where our instructional methods come from when we want to intentionally design for learner variability. Promote independence. It really is the way.
That's what I was going to say, that you really want to focus on that. How do we create independent learners and thinkers, right? They're not dependent on others in order to accomplish their mission of learning. I often ask in IEP meetings, what are we doing for these kids that we're attaching an extra frontal lobe onto them? And I just don't think that's necessary. I think we need to let kids, you know, learn positive struggle, and provide them with the resources so that they don't need to struggle and they don't need
Right.
another person.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
make it happen.
Too often we are their frontal lobe, right? Right,
Way too
Tracy?
often.
And we have to step back sometimes. Sure, we provide scaffolds, but there are times when we have to step back. And I like to throw in this book if you're looking for book resources, and this is an older one, Read Aside: How Schools Are Killing Reading and What You Can Do About It. The link is at the bottom, and this was a book written by Kelly Gallagher. And he describes Read Aside as the systematic killing of the love of reading, often exacerbated by the mind-numbing practices found in schools. So again, always think about what you're doing. Think about those reading logs, for example, those imposed reading logs that require learners to document and their parents to sign that they read for 20 minutes. I mean, nothing can take away the enjoyment of reading more than an imposed reading log that a parent has to sign off on. So again, think about what you're doing and think about how you can be intentional in promoting a love of learning.
I think when we think about all of these decisions in instruction, we really want to remember that design matters. And what we do from the beginning when we're considering the outcome isn't, it needs to be intentional. And all too often, conversations occur with teachers that they are designing for a different outcome than what their actual design is in practice. So I'm going to give you an example. You were just talking about read aside, Karen. I'm going to talk about something really simple, which is math, right? And all too often I see seventh and eighth grade students who aren't able to be at a higher level math because they don't have the fundamental math math skills in terms of their math facts. For whatever reason, they weren't able to establish those math facts early on in their educational career. Yet their thinking process is strong and their reasoning is strong, but yet we hold them back because we won't give them a calculator, right? And why? And I always ask, why? What's the goal of this lesson? Is the goal of this lesson to check whether or not they have math facts? Or is the goal of this lesson because you want them to understand a certain math concept? So I think when we're thinking about the design, I want to encourage all teachers to think about what's the actual goal that you're trying to accomplish in the lesson? What are the distinct understandings? And then what do students need to be able to do to accomplish this goal? I started teaching a million years ago at the Carroll School in Lincoln for students with dyslexia, right? And I had no experience with this prior to taking on this job. And God, I will always be grateful that that's where I began my career. And I had a wonderful, I mean, maybe he's out there, Charlie Newhall, wonderful mentor, who said to me, every day you show up into a class, you need to think about two things. What's your goal of your content? And then what's your skills focus? And you need to make sure that nothing else impacts whether kids can get to that content focus and that skills focus. And whatever it is that's going to bar them from getting there, you need to figure out a way to get them around it. Now, this was 2001. This is before all these wonderful technologies existed. So I spent hours cutting and pasting and gluing and photocopying and finding all these things and writing 14 different passages so I could get all of these different students in my classrooms to be able to engage in the learning. But what it taught me was that when I designed with purpose, when I had the goal in mind and I was very clear about what that goal was, I could remove obstacles for learning to students that allowed them to engage meaningfully in the lesson and allowed them to get excited about learning. I no longer put their disabilities and their challenges or their frustrations at the forefront of every class. I found ways to let them get to the joy of learning. And by doing this, I could have all different learners of different levels learning at a very, very high pace in a very rich and a very content rich class. When I started getting into the public schools and I recognized that I was not going to have the luxury of 6 to 8 students, but now I was going to have 20 to 25 to 30 kids in a class, the same exact methodology worked. When I figured out what it is I wanted to teach and how I could make sure that kids could access it, I found that students liked to be in my room. And I found that they found success. And I think that it's not so difficult to do. You just have to design with intention because design matters.
And Tracy, I want to make the point too that, oh my goodness, I lost it's not, kids are not their labels and kids are not their test scores. And especially when we're working with kids with cognitive challenges, and I don't know, you probably have, many of you have sat in on IEPs where some of those WISC scores are in the first percentile. And again, kids are not their test scores. They're not that piece of paper. Maybe that was a rough day, but no matter what, we always want to presume potential and build in instruction that can meet their needs and customize it. So Tracy, I'm listening to how you individualized it back in 2001. We're going to, at the end of this, we're going to look at some, I mean, it's so much easier now to differentiate instruction, right?
I know. Someone convinced me to leave the classroom. Never should have done it. This stuff is so exciting. So I think we want to shift on now. I think our soapbox, I don't know if you guys get the sense, but I think Karen and I could launch into long, long soapbox conversations around how important it is to design for learner variability. And we wanted to discuss some tips that we think are essential. Of course, in a very short time, we can't go into full detail on every single thing, but we really hope everyone will take away at least one or two ideas of something they can put into practice tomorrow.
Now, one of the practical tips, actually, before we'll get to this one. Practical tips, changing the default settings in Google Docs. All of you who are Google Classroom, use Google Classroom as your LMS. Have you noticed what the default font size, and spacing is? And I've watched kids that they've typed like for 30 minutes, and what it actually looks like they've produced so little. And it's because that default font size is 11 and the spacing is 1.15. Who does that work for? So one of the things that I would recommend that you do is all the instructions are right here for how you can change the default settings in Google Docs. And you would think it would be easier because Microsoft Word does make it so easy, but it's a more challenging process. But I mean, it's just a more multi-step process. And what I would suggest that you do is open up a blank Google Doc. And always recommend the Lexan font because that's felt to research has shown that that's actually a really nice font for reading and increases readability. And then change it to at least font size 12. And if you're pushing out, if your learners are younger, then you could make it even larger than that and make it at least 1.5 spacing or 2 if your learners are younger. And then just follow the directions here and you'll be able to update and change your default settings. One of the simplest things that you can do to improve output, and also when they're editing and revising, it's much easier to edit and revise based on the research that shows more white space facilitates the process.
You know, it's interesting. I had a student several years ago who, because of color blindness, blue was something that didn't really, it just made it very difficult for them to see. And so we changed the link font color. So when it was a hyperlink, it didn't show up as blue. So simple things like that can make a huge difference in a child's experience. He wasn't recognizing that things were linked. He couldn't see them very clearly. So just I think paying attention to the options and the variability that children walk into your room with is important. All
So
right.
I'm curious, what do you think about you changing that? I mean, I'm hoping that this would be something, it is connected to your login. So anytime, no matter what device you're on, that is how it will open up. So I'm hoping that that is, we want practicality. I'm hoping that that's something that you will decide to do once you return back to school. And
And
especially
teach students how to do it.
yes, yes. But once you push out assignments through Google Classroom and they're set up for success, then that promotes that independence that our kids need. And you can also help them to customize their own. And the next slide, too, Tracy, really does further talk about how this promotes readability. The font choice, the font size, the color options, the contrast, the increased white space. And with some of the text-to-speech tools, there is dual color highlighting that can be really helpful when they're editing or when they're accessing grade level content, and it helps promote decoding and fluency. And I just wanted to take a little sidestep and just say these are strategies that are included in the Inclusive Learning 365 book that I co-authored, as well as the tips to activate inclusive learning, which is from ASCD, and the book is from ISTE. So those are available through ISTE or ASCD if you're interested. The links are included right within the those images if you're interested in purchasing anything like that. Sorry, little sidebar.
No, sidebar also, book two is coming out. Looking forward to that.
Thanks.
So
So,
speech. Let's talk about this because this is one that I just don't understand why most people don't use it. And in fact, Karen, I will tell you that I think it's so important for everyone to know how to use text to speech because
yeah.
there is a cognitive load for reading. And if your focus isn't to teach kids to read in that lesson, why should you waste the cognitive load on just reading, right? So I always tell kids all the time, hey, have it read to you while you're reading it. It'll only help you. It'll only help your brain to map it out differently. And so I used to have all students in my classes practice how to use text to speech options. But go ahead, you share some of your favorites.
But that's really great, Tracy, because that is not my experience in working with general educators. And I do hope that there's a lot of general educators in the room tonight or watching it at a later time, because text to speech is one of those low-hanging fruits that you can just show everyone. And I think we do have a slide that does the next slide. Yes, it does mention some of the readily available options. The other thing too is those little computers in their pockets, their iPhones, the phones that they carry around with them have built-in text to speech as well, and they do need to turn it on because and it by default, I don't know why, but the Apple does not turn on text to speech automatically. So you can watch a YouTube video to see how to do it. But again, that's something so many learners really do need to learn how to listen to things, and it just bypasses that reading challenge and it makes it so much easier for them. But the other reason why text to speech is so important to show all learners is think about editing. When you edit your work, if you listen to it as part of the editing process, that can really enhance your ability to detect errors because you may not if you read it to yourself, our brains fill in what's the gap. And so we oftentimes will read it and misread something because we think that it is correct. But the dual color highlighted text to speech can help us identify those things that are errors in our text compositions. So we have a few favorites.
Mhm.
And I'd be curious to know, can you put it in the chat? I'd be curious to know which one of these, those of you who are attending this webinar tonight are already using. We've got Moat, we've got Cami, we've got Read and Write for Google, we've got Speechify. And if you can just put it in the chat, and if you're not using anything, great, because now you're going to learn about some options here tonight. And that's one of the reasons why we love, preaching, preaching the mantra of text to speech. So, okay, no, okay, good. I like seeing these responses. Let's just take a look. So we use Read and Write, but I also recommend Read Speaker. Okay, Note and Cami and Read Write, Moat and Cami. Read and Write and Cami, Read and Write. So many of you are already using these, which is awesome. Now, have you customized how you can use the different features? Have you customized the voice rate? Have you customized the voices? Or have you allowed or encouraged your learners to customize the voice and rate for what works for them? Because there are always these capabilities of further customization and making it all around what the learner needs. So I do see everyone is using, we use the read aloud feature in Microsoft Edge. So it sounds like this is something that everyone is already using. I mean, maybe not everyone, but many of you are sharing what. So the other thing I want to ask you, availability doesn't necessarily mean that it's being used. So I would encourage you to ensure that all of your learners know how to use the features, the text-to-speech features that you have readily available in your districts. So just a little tip because I've seen this off. Oh yeah, we have Read and Write. Okay, well, do your students know how to use it? So ensure that they do. Is
So
any,
I just want to point
yeah.
out a couple things too in terms of things that I've done with my students is teaching them when it can become really valuable for them. So I would have when I taught social studies, a lot of dense text, a lot of primary sources that can be pretty difficult in terms of vocabulary. Where if students are struggling through with their eyes, if they can struggle through with their eyes and ears together, I found that they were far more successful. And I had a number of students, some of my most high end, some of my highest readers, right, in terms of their grade level equivalent in reading, and some who would tell me that they actually found it more productive because they could listen and take notes and keep going, as opposed to having to kind of constantly go back and forth between the text and their notes. That was really powerful for them. And some kids just, are more attuned to things when they hear it. They just remember it differently. So I think kids learning what their learning style is and what helps them learn is really, really important. The last thing I would say is it's important for kids to choose their voices. So if you are going to use, any of these technologies in your classroom, spend a day and let them speed date voices. The kids have a great time with them. Let them figure out which one they're going to use. I like to be spoken to by the British male voice. I don't know why. Makes me think I'm like going to Oxford or something. It makes me feel very posh. So mine are always some UK male voice, but kids get a great kick out of that, and it's going to take time. So if you're going to use this in your classrooms, definitely budget some time for voice dating because it will take them a while to choose which one, and you'll get frustrated if you didn't plan on that.
Right, yeah. And Tracy, you're bringing up that point. We want to show learners what are the possibilities, and we want to help them to build strategic competence. What works for them, depending on what they're being asked to do. So we're helping them build their own individualized toolbox. So show all learners and let them customize what works for them and choose the features and the tools that they need depending on what it is they need to do. So it's always learner centered. And I love that you're calling it voice dating. I
Excuse
haven't heard that
me.
term before.
And I should just say, Speechify is doing some really cool stuff with AI in terms of voice generation and what voices you can use. It's unfortunately that's the expensive version. Like it's not the free version. So there is you can use Speechify for free, but if you want the cool features, you got to pay for it. But I guess if you really want something cool AI generated voice, you can pay the money.
And that's the same with Read and Write for Google. The premium version, which all teachers get free, does include like 50 different AI generated voices that are very high quality. And Moat has a really nice voice just by default, which is, that's another option as well.
Yep. And kids get used to it too.
Yeah, if you need it, then it works well.
The next thing I'm going to talk about is feedback tools. I think one of the things that and obviously we can talk about this at spring conference, is the essential need for students to get feedback, real feedback, meaningful feedback that's attuned to what that student needs. And you just can't do this very easily without technology. I just don't know how teachers can do it very easily. We just don't have time in our day to get these little mini conferences with students on a consistent basis, not if you have a lot of students in your class. So voice comments became a huge, huge benefit to me when I was teaching in the classroom, and I still see it used very successfully. And, Moat is the one that, a lot of people know of. You can easily go into Google Docs, you can go into Word documents, you can go into all kinds of things and put Moat comments in. You can even do it embedded right into most LMSs. And, I know most people use Google Classroom. You can embed the voice comments right on there. Um, and it's free. And Beep is a new one. I've been hearing about it. Some people have been using Beep. Karen went on today and like made a connection with the creators and talking about some features that they were going to be putting on there. And I think that's a really great tool. Just check it out if you haven't used it. And then, I used to use Google Keep quite a bit. And I realized today you can only do the voice comments um, through the phone app, through the iOS app. But if you use Google, if you're a Google Keep user, if you have students that are Google Keep users, know that you can add voice notes right into Google Keep. And I have a number of students who used Google Keep as their primary way of keeping track of assignments and to-do lists and task items and such. And it was really helpful for students to be able to add in their own voice, or for me to add in my voice to them. If they was walking around and they wanted instruction, hey, can you say that again? And I just say it to their phone. I know now kids are not really allowed to have their phones in school, so that's becoming a little bit more difficult. But I've had many students who were sitting at home struggling with something. I wasn't available with office hours at all ends of the day, and nor would I expect any teacher to do that. But students have a much easier time, oftentimes, of going on and expressing their confusion in words and voice. And so I'd say to them, just add a note, into your Google Keep. And when you come in tomorrow, you can just play the note to me. So I would have kids come in and play their note, and I would know what their question was and figure out where they were struggling. And it just really does open up a lot more possibility in terms of getting that conversation with students on a consistent basis and giving them feedback and having them give you feedback, which can be a window into their learning and thinking. The other thing I would think is essential is strong rubrics. And I will be very transparent. I loathe most rubrics because I feel like they're a checklist and a menu of, like a to-do list of things, and take away all the fun and creativity and thinking out of learning. So let's assume we have good rubrics that actually share with students how to build their capacity and how to stretch and drive themselves to think deeper and to learn more. And you do that by creating strong rubrics that kind of gives kids a sense of where they should go. And kids benefit from that. So if you're going to create rubrics, why does it have to be the same rubric for every student? If you have diverse learners in your class, why does every student need to have the same rubric? It would take forever if I was doing this on a spreadsheet by hand. But now, with some of these different AI tools, you can have rubrics differentiated and created very easily, right? You also can, within Google Classroom, create rubrics now. And you've been able to do this for a while, but the rubrics can be, you can start creating different rubrics for different assignments. And now Google Classroom makes it really easy to group students into different groups. And you can create different rubrics for those different groups, which make your feedback much quicker. And that's just the language focus areas, the little John Carroll action from way back in the day. You start creating real focus area rubrics, and you can give kids quick, instant feedback that tells them where they are in their trajectory of learning that is actually meaningful, as opposed to waiting for them to be done with it, handing it in, and then you wasting all your time grading something. Because once the grade is on it, the kids don't care about it anymore, right? Unless you want to be grading it 3 times, which means you got to be taking it and handing it back in and back in and back in. What if you had really meaningful rubrics that you could go on and select while kids are in action? You actually could get them to change their thinking and their learning in the process, which would be great. And I'm really intrigued by this idea of visual rubrics, by the way. This woman made this post around how she's making rubrics like a sliding scale so kids can see where they're at. To me, it's in line with similar things that you see on, if you use Seesaw, which I know a lot of people don't use, but Seesaw does this great job of, as you give kids different feedback on different things, it tells you where you're at in your learning. So for instance, if you're doing a 1 to 4 rating, 1 would be seen as like red, 2 is, you know, orange into yellow, 3 is blue, and then green is the 4. So as you want to progress toward green, as you put in different scores for different skills, it shows the kids where they're how they're growing in their skills. So I think visual rubrics could be really powerful for kids too. Kids need agency. They need to know where they stand in their learning. They need to be invested, and we as teachers need to figure out ways to do that. And these tools and these, can really help with that process.
So
So
we're showing you some practical ideas. Now think about who can benefit think about your current instructional methods and strategies, who's left out. Consider some of these strategies and tips that we're suggesting to you that maybe then will reach those kids who are on the edges, on the fringes. The next slide does show. So one of the things that you may notice have you noticed that there's live captions running on this particular presentation? And I, how are you using this particular strategy to when you're presenting in Google Slides or even in PowerPoint too, because it's also possible there, that you turn on closed captions. Because again, this is so important, live captions. This is such an important option. And let's see, put it in the chat if you're already doing this, or put it in the chat if you're interested to see how to do this, because this is so easy to do. I just taught Tracy before our session tonight. Close Chrome captions. Yes. And I just taught my students. Yes. Excellent. Yes, Rain, of course you did. Okay. And the why behind it. Yes. Because think about who benefits when we turn on live captions. Chrome captions if enable. Okay, right. Okay, yes. Does anyone need to see how to do it? Is anyone unfamiliar? You know what? I'll assume that some of you are because this isn't automatic. And so, Tracy, you want to just show everybody how you do it?
is it show up down there? I think it shows up.
Yeah, it shows up in the bottom 3 dots in the bottom left corner. And then, Tracy, you can explain it as you do it.
Yeah, I just opened up 3 dots and I went to caption preferences, and then you can adjust text size. And you and I, Karen, had a pretty interesting conversation around whether we should go bigger or smaller. Position, we chose the top, and I thought, I hadn't really thought about the difference, except that you shared something that drives me crazy, which is if you're in the back of the room, you can't see the bottom of the screen, right? So going up the top gives those kids in the back a chance of seeing it. And then there's a toggling captions to different languages if you so choose. Can I point
And
out something else that drives me crazy, Karen?
yeah,
And this really doesn't have to do with captions. It has to do with the one size fits all model of pressing play on a big screen. So I will hold off on my soapbox moment of people being anti-screen, but being okay with the big screen in front because they're both screens. Especially since the big screen in front, when we project and think, oh, kids have their focus, their computers are closed, but they're focused on the front. First of all, you have no idea if they're focused on the front. You have absolutely zero idea. They could be thinking about what they're going to eat for lunch or what they're doing on the weekend and staring at the screen in the front. But more so than that is, I've been in a number of classes where I can't tell if the kids are actually learning what they're supposed to be learning from the video that's playing in the front. And I miss things sometimes, and all I want to do is hit pause and rewind, right? So I want people to think about when we're showing videos to our class, the benefit of maybe letting kids watch that video independently. Even if they watch it all at the same time, let students choose. Let students choose whether they want to pause and rewind. Let students choose whether or not they want to use captions or not. Maybe there are students in your class who would prefer to have the captions be in a different language. Maybe there are students who, you know what, it's kind of something they already know about, and they just want to watch it on 1.5 speed because they already know it. They want to get through this because they want to move on to the next thing. When you make a choice for everyone with one thing, you limit their options of making it for themselves. And something so simple, I know there's fantastic tools. You can use Nearpod and you can use Edpuzzle and all these things that cost money. But you can actually do that just through sharing it out in a Google slide. Right. And I know there are teachers on here. I know there are teachers definitely on here who probably clip videos into different chunks because you can take the same video and do a different start and stop time on Google Slides, where at the bottom you could ask questions. You could give kids prompts. You could let them, pause here and take a note. So I don't think we think about how easy it is to customize things so that all learners can find value in a video. And I think just, sometimes captions alone are not enough. So I just want to point
Right. And you're giving kids agency that way. You're empowering them to, if they need to see something over and over again to really understand it, you're empowering them to do that. The one thing too is this video, this YouTube video shows you how you can customize closed captions within YouTube videos. And I would encourage you to always turn on closed captions when you're projecting with YouTube videos. And
We are
Rain,
going to share these out at the end so people can click on any of these
yeah.
links and check things out.
And Raina shared how she shared the live captions and closed captions with all of her students and then sent it home to share with her parents. What an awesome idea. That's
Yes,
great.
absolutely. Absolutely. Great. Oh, it's going to
In
start
this
playing.
video,
Sorry, I'm going to press.
Whoops. Yeah, we don't need to see it.
Great. So now we move on to our conversation on AI, and really, I mean, endless possibilities, endless possibilities. And I know that there are a lot of people who have I would say, concern sometimes around AI in education for various reasons. And so we're not here to try to convince people of whether their concerns are valid or not valid. I think we just want people to think about the possibilities that AI can offer within the conversation of learner variability. And the first thing is that it really can be a thought partner. And we're going to show some examples of how that is the case. But you no longer have to plan on your own. You no longer have to search the internet for things and spend hours and hours and hours looking for something and then spend hours creating something with it. You no longer have to rely on finding another teacher in your building at 10 o'clock tonight to to give you does this look good or what am I missing? Right? You now have this thought partner that's available to you. So it really does create equity for teachers who may not have those thought partners in their building. I was always so privileged to have some amazing thought partners that I worked with, but I know not everybody does, or maybe you're in a position in your school that there isn't anyone else who teaches what you teach. So you don't have that, inherent thought partner. So it really does create that opportunity. It also creates creativity at your fingertips. I was a person who loved to spend the time with the design, the images, and I would have the bulletin boards, and that was just fun for me. I love the crafty stuff. That's something I just love to do. Not everybody loves to do that. And so you now don't have to do it on your own. Like there are so many tools out there that can make you look like the most creative person in the world and, a true artist when you're really not. Um, and I think that it just opens up doors for a lot of people. And then I think the final thing about AI that I would say in terms of learner variability is it really is an easy lift with meaningful impact. It really is something that you don't have to spend a ton of time putting a lot of thought into to get a lot out of. And you can choose what you take out of it, right? There's no one size fits all for AI. There's no reason if you test it out, you have to use what it says. Sometimes you like, yep, I like this better, and this is why. And it's that sometimes is good instructional decision making. So we just wanted to share some of our favorites and some things that we've heard about. There are a million and times more that we could go through, but let's just jump into a couple that we're going to talk about here.
And I think one of the things you want to think about too is this is for professional productivity. It has never been easier to customize instruction and to accommodate for learner variability. I mean, AI has really transformed our opportunities and our possibilities. And so there are a few that we're highlighting, and I'd be interested too, if you can add into the chat the ones that you are using to promote learner variability when you're designing your instruction, add them to the chat because we're always, again, always learning new things.
Right. And definitely call them out, Karen, because I can't see the chat because I'm presenting here. But so first, there are so many options out there. And I would say that this is like the Pepsi and Coke decision making, right? Everyone has a favorite. And I would say just like Pepsi and Coke, like I prefer Coke regular versus regular Pepsi, but I prefer Diet Pepsi to Diet Coke. And so I think that that's the same with some of these tools. Like there might be different reasons why I like different ones for different tools, right? So I think, we use Brisk in my district, so I've become a pretty proficient Brisk user and I'm really enjoying a lot of the tools that's in there. We're also using the premium piece, which I think has a lot more, they call them the boost pieces, which I'm really enjoying. But even the basic version is quite strong with lesson design. And I found the same thing with some of the others. And Magic School has some really cool creative pieces to it, which I think are really cool that I think kids like to use. So I think there's just different ones. I haven't used School AI as much. I know Diffit is pretty easy as well with some lesson design pieces. But I encourage everyone to test them out. And if you're playing, ask the same question, do the same thing on each of them, right? So you can actually get a sense of which one do you like better for different tasks. I think that's how we can learn and push. They're really positive. The tool that I'm using the most right now, just because I don't know, I'm geeking out on it, would be Notebook LM. I'm really calling it the MacGyver of tools. Does MacGyver have an MAC? I don't know, but whatever. It's like duct tape. It really is. If those of you who are not as old as me might be like, I have no idea what she's talking about with MacGyver, but for those youngins, he used to fix everything with duct tape. He was a wizard, and I feel like Notebook LM can be that for teachers. And what I have really been excited about is the number of resources it can create to present materials in different ways. And, we haven't mentioned UDL too much here, but I would say one of the things that when I think myself back to David Rose and all of the things he taught me about UDL is that students take in information differently. Their brains are designed to receive information differently. And it doesn't matter like whether they can see it in all ways or not. And I'm not even talking about the kids who struggle. Some of our strongest students prefer things visually as opposed to in text, and other kids prefer it in text. Some kids learn really well from videos and some kids don't. Some kids really like the audio, some kids would prefer to read it. And I don't, why do we have to make that choice for them? And so one of the things I'm really enjoying is how easy it is with Notebook LM to create all of those resources simply. I can put all of my things for a unit into a notebook. I can put websites, I can put lesson notes, I can put slideshows, and then I can create with ease a video that explains it all. I can create an infographic that designs something. I can create several by creating different prompts that prompt it to do things. So if you haven't played with Notebook LM and you're a Google district, I highly, highly recommend jumping on. I turned Karen into a Notebook LM fiend today.
You did, yeah. I have to buy it because I don't get all those features. I guess when your school has, you get it through your school district, and there's many features that make it so powerful.
And your school district might not have turned it on yet. I know some schools have different policies around AI. If your school district doesn't have it turned on, I would really encourage you to ask them to turn it on for at least teachers, right? If they're not willing to turn it on for students, ask if you can, ask if you can pilot it for teachers and share what you do with it. It's
Well, and again, Tracy, you're going to be showing two of the things that you created in
yeah.
Notebook LM that will make it even more appealing and intriguing.
I'm sure there are people on here who are far more experienced with Canva and use the AI features within Canva. Canva is a free tool for all educators and all students, and they are constantly building out what you can do with AI, including coding games and coding, different resources and materials and creating images and creating presentations, all kinds of really cool things that you can do with it that get kids thinking creatively, and get them producing. So, I've heard people talk about the fact that if they use AI, it's taking away the cognitive load. I don't think that's true. I think you can just shift what you're asking it to do. If designing the words and designing the text is what's important, then make sure that they're not designing that with AI. But if they're writing a paragraph and you want them to put the paragraph into a really cool slide so that you can put the paragraphs together in a book, do you really need to have kids spending, 45 minutes on a Google slide popping pictures in there that are meaningless? Or can you have them be creative and use Canva AI to do it? I think, I'm sure people have tons of reasons why they use Canva AI, but I encourage people to check it out for creativity. A new one I actually just tried out today, but I knew some people were using it, was Napkin AI. Again, it's free up to a point. I don't know how many you can create, but I'll show you an example of it. It's just another way of creating visuals for students. So if you have students who are more, who like the notes and are more text-based, it can do a nice job of taking some text and making it look pretty cool. If you are a person like me who's on meetings all the time and are terrible at taking notes, I highly encourage you to think about exploring different note-taking apps for those tools. I, I think you have to be ethical when you're on a meeting if you're going to be recording it to make sure people know that they're recording it. I've been testing out Read AI, and my tech director said to me, "Hey, you might want to mention to people that it also is actually recording them versus just transcribing them." So just different features you want to explore which ones work best for you, and figure that out. Read AI calculates how much you talked, how quickly you spoke, which clearly I don't speak slowly, so it's always good for me to know how quickly I was talking, and different things. So different, check them out. I'm sure they all have benefits, and that's really the great thing about them, right? Is you get to decide which one might work for you. Some of them have free versions, some of them have paid versions. Again, if you're in a person who's doing a lot of Google Meets or a lot of Zooms, it might be something worth your while to explore. And Karen, why don't you talk about Glint?
So Glint is an incredible, if you've got learners on the autism spectrum or learners who have AAC communication devices or learners who need social stories or visual schedules, Glint is it's an incredible tool that I highly recommend that you explore if this is the kind of population with students with whom you're working because it has so many capabilities and it creates instantaneous visual supports that are really so essential for some of our learners who thrive when they are given visuals. The other one that I didn't mention that's not on this list, I also, if you've got kids who need help breaking down a task, Goblin Tools is really an incredible resource for that. It really helps break down tools and you can customize how much depth. So, like maybe you're assigning an essay on a particular topic, and you can open it up in Google Tools and it will help break down how much time you need to be spending. And it really helps guide those kids with executive function issues. Maybe they have trouble initiating a task, sustaining attention, completing it, whatever it is. Goblin Tools is an awesome AI tool for that.
So Goblin.
Yep,
Oh,
yep.
all right. Add it to our list. Awesome. We just wanted to take you through a couple examples of this, and again, you'll be able to click on these links. The first one is an example of just the first page. I took a screenshot of the first page of something I created in Napkin. I took the notes um, for this presentation. I put it into Napkin, and it created a text note sheet. And then I went in, and you're allowed to go in through each of the text pieces and decide, do you want to create images to coincide those that text. I think I'm not a math or science teacher, but I was thinking about how valuable this might be for math and science teachers who, if they're putting word problems in or explaining a concept or a different process in science, how the visual might really create. I don't know, if you're a science or math teacher, check it out and let me know how it goes because I think that I could see a lot of utility in adding the images once you have all the text. So again, you can use it for free up to a point, I think, but give it a check, check it out if you haven't used it before. The next two pictures over here are just an example um, of a lesson. I used Brisk again. I told you I use Brisk in my district, so it's what I have access to. Um, and I went on and jumped on and said, okay, I want to create a lesson plan. And you can just note here, I think a lot of people forget that it's it's not just you don't just go on and say, hey, create a lesson. I mean, you could, hey, create a lesson plan on Brown versus Board of Education, and God only knows what you get back. But when you start telling it specifically what you want, it will give you that level of specificity. So here I said, create a lesson plan. Like I said, I imagined we had 49-minute periods. So I always say less than that because I don't know, it never quite goes as well as the timing. But I said I want a 3-day lesson, 40-minute class periods for an eighth grade class. I was, by the way, a civics teacher, so I just picked one out of my head that I could think of really easily. And Brown versus Board of Education, I gave the content focus, then I gave the skills focus, and then I said that there were different needs in that classroom, right? Who am I planning for, right? So there were specific needs. I had a couple kids in IEPs. I had kids with language-based learning disabilities. I have some kids with 504, the processing delay, and two ELL students with different WIDA levels. And when you go and you create that, it'll pop up, and I can show you the example in just a second. But it then will ask you, how did that look? Is there anything you want to change? Right? So you have an opportunity to kind of communicate with the chatbot to tell it that you want to change something. You can translate something into different, you can take less detail. You can then say, you know what, I want you to translate this into a different language for a different student. Translation is not always the go-to tool for when we're working with students who are ELL, but sometimes it really does, maybe you're translating for the family at home, right? So the family can participate. Or you want to create a quick note sheet or a guide sheet or an activity. It really does make it quite possible. You can then also ask it, you know what, I've seen teachers who have gone on and popped in kids learning IEP goals right into Brisk and said, I'm planning a lesson on this. Here are the goals. Can you please suggest how this lesson might meet these students' goals, or what I can alter within the lesson to give feedback on their goals, right? So there's just different ways to use it. Hopefully this will pop up.
And again, Tracy, you can actually do that in other
Yeah.
generative AI as
Oh,
well.
sure. That's why I said I was just using Brisk because that's the one I have access to. But Gemini does a lot of this. Copilot does a lot of this, right? I know some people might pay for GPT, but I don't pay for things. So there we go. So this is, can you see this, Karen?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
So this is just an example of what was created. If I clicked, this took about, I don't know, 80 seconds to generate this, just puts it into Google Doc. And you can see that it goes through with an overview, learning targets. It talks about different accommodations. It goes through specifically the objectives, the materials it would need. It lists opening activities. It lists the vocabulary, which I always find is so important. And we don't always pull the vocabulary out for students, which is a huge miss. I think we need to do that more for kids. It talks about like here I want some mini lecture. I could have said to the Brisk, I want there to be this long mini lecture. I want there to be a slideshow. Like I could have told, and you could do this in all the generative AIs. You can be very, very specific of what you want it to produce. I didn't for this one. Um, it has a video that it's going to suggest, and then it gives you some notes on that, and then it goes through. So again, I'm just kind of showing it breaks this down. It knew to break out background information, and then it breaks into the skill of analyzing resources. And then the third day, it's going to give you some small group activities, and then it's going to have you the third day practice it. So, really well designed with background first, skill practice second day, third day, put that into action. So I didn't tell it to do that, but it did a nice job. So I just, I really encourage people to give these tools a go. I think back to the olden days of when I used to have the pink paper, the blue paper, the yellow paper, the purple paper, the paper that had, a circle on the top of it, and I would highlight their names and I would try to change the paper color to each different lesson so no one thought that they were a pink paper kid. And I would, cut and paste and glue. And it was a great arts and crafts lesson for me, but God, did I sleep little. And I think I didn't really meet the needs. And so really just thinking about it. And as you pointed out, Karen, if we do nothing else, can we make all of our text readable for the students who are reading it, right? Can you change reading levels? Can you make it so kids can access the information? So really, really just super easy to do.
Yeah, definitely something as basic as text leveling, depending on their independent. Now, the other thing to keep in mind when you text level is their comprehension level might be higher than their decoding level. So always show them both options, like maybe you've changed it because you want them to access the text independently, and so you've scaled it down to maybe 2 grade levels below, depending on their readability level. But also keep in mind that their comprehension may be higher. So you want to show them both levels and give them text to speech. And then finally, We're
Um,
really, look at that. We thought there'd be time for questions and
I know.
things.
Well, we never have time. As I said, we get excited about this. So this is a an infographic that I created with Notebook LM. And this involved me putting in the resources that Karen and I were drawing from, putting in our presentation, putting in some of our notes, and just saying, create an infographic, right? And I didn't even give it too much detail, it didn't too much instruction, and it was able to pull all of the essential ideas that we really have been trying to hone in on and create this really cool infographic, right? So um, if you're a visual learner, if you're a kid who doesn't do well with tons of text, right? How many kids do we have that just love graphic novels? And it's because they just absorb material better with the visuals. How powerful could it be to take some of our big things and put them into infographics for kids without you having to spend all the time creating them? So this was created by Notebook LM, super easy to do, but I think pretty powerful. And then I said, well, go ahead, Karen, you can go into this one.
So actually, yeah, a little, but the whole point is let's really break barriers. Let's get everything out of the way that is interfering with our kids' independence and success. So, smash anything. You don't. We just want you thinking in new ways because, and again, this isn't to add to what you're already doing. We want you to think, what can I replace that is less effective? So we want to change mindsets. And we talk about growth mindset and fixed mindset for our students. So too often, I wonder if we as educators need to develop our own growth mindset when it comes to thinking about the instructional materials that we're using. So let's really think about how designing for all really means designing for all. And then to summarize everything, Tracy created this video in Notebook LM. Oh, it's not showing up.
It'll play.
For decades,
Okay, there it
the
is.
whole education
And
system has been built on this lie, the idea of an average learner. And by designing for this person who doesn't even exist, we've ended up with classrooms that don't really fit anyone. So let's break down why that is, and more importantly, what we can do to fix it.
so we can share that.
And
Yep,
Um,
it'll be in the slides, but I did very little to make this happen. I gave it a quick prompt about, drawing on learner variability and pulling from quotes. And if you scroll through it, even used pictures of from the actual slideshow. And it created this really awesome video that is just a great recap of this of our talk and some of the things we were trying to point out. So simple, easy lift that could have really big impact. We didn't talk about that it also can create an audio file. When I've been sharing, I now as a curriculum director, I share a lot of resources with my teachers. I've been using, because like I said, again, we use Brisk. I've been using Brisk and I'll now use Notebook LM because I'm loving this to create audio files. I have a lot of teachers who've told me that they don't have time to read, but they have 15 minutes in the car ride home. So they'll listen to the articles in a podcast, right? So I've been really trying to create things as audio, share it both as a here's the text if you want to read it, here's the audio file if you'd like to listen to it, and then Brisk actually creates podcasts. So it'll take an article and make it sound like it's some like these two podcasters will be talking about the article, which can be really powerful as well. So really good stuff. All right, so I'm going to move on to the next thing.
so
This is
shift happens and we are part of it. And just, again, reflect on what you're currently doing. What can you do? What can you replace? And what can you rethink and reimagine? And also, Katie Novak has written a great book called Unlearn. And I recommend that because that's all part of how shift happens when we think how we can design for learning variabilities. So I hope that we've given you some practical ideas. We hope you're thinking about some of the ways that you could design or redesign using new ideas. And again, this is just the tip of the iceberg because the next slide talks about something that's happening this summer.
Yeah. So it's still in the making, right? But you can mark your calendars, the date is firm. On August 4th, we'll be at Barnstable High School in beautiful Cape Cod for a full, day of professional learning, all on learner variability. So follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn if you don't already, and you'll see details posted. We'll post options for people to present. We'd love people who have ideas to share, who want to do sessions. And we'd love for people to come, be a part of a day where we can really dig into, further into some of these ideas and not just run over them, but really dig into how we can use them and we can create and share. So looking forward to that. And then if you are a school leader or you have a school leader in mind, just a reminder that on March 6th, at Holy Cross, we'll be doing our leadership spring conference, which is all about assessing wonder and really about assessment. Excuse me, with the focus of how do we change assessment to actually drive meaningful learning as opposed to making it so that it shuts kids down. So we'll be talking about really cool forward-thinking assessment and action. We're talking about how do we use data to drive instruction in a really cool way? How do we use data differently? And then what's the evidence and innovation around some of the assessment things that are going on? We have two amazing keynoters, Star Saxteen and Beth Holland will be there, as well as a whole bunch of other amazing presenters. And so if you are available, if you're a leader or if you're a school leader, or if you have a school leader that you think might be interested, please share this with them. And we're still looking for a couple more. We have a solid lineup, but if you have any great ideas that go in any of these strands, we still have room for a couple more speakers. So we'd love to have you. And I think, we also want to make sure you are aware of a MassCUE event coming up in March. We're going to start a book talk with the awesome Dr. Tori Trust and Dr. Rabbit. I don't know him, but Robert Malloy, I think. I feel badly for not knowing how to pronounce his name, but Tori Trust is a professor at UMass Amherst, and she has a new book out with AI about AI and civic engagement, and we're really excited to have that talk with her and learn more from her and from her co-author on different ideas of how to use AI to engage in our communities. Clearly, something our communities across this country need. And finally, if you are interested in getting more involved in MassCUE, we are always looking for people to get more involved. Join a committee. Jump in, reach out to me, reach out to Karen, and anyone on the board, or, reach out to Andrea's on here as well. She's our director of operations and strategy. And, we really we'd love people to get involved. And our mission is to serve educators in the region, and your voices are really important to us. So please get involved. And with that, if anyone has any questions or thoughts, we'd love to hear from people. I know we've run a little bit over, but I don't want to miss out on answering anyone's questions.
I just see some thank yous in the chat.
Great.
So, yeah, we're so grateful that you chose to join us tonight. You had so many other options, and we appreciate your spending time with us. And I love too that a couple of people added in some resources in the chat because we're always learning new things. We want to model the love of lifelong learning by being willing to, continue to add to our own toolboxes. So thank you, those of you who added it to the chat, and thank you for joining us tonight.